So, Maury, we were talking about A Current Affair and,
Right.
and sort of the beginnings of that.
Yeah.
And you'd mentioned Mary Beth Whitehead
Right.
and that story. Um, those stories, how would you compare A Current Affair to Entertainment Tonight in talking about the celebrity aspect, as in Mary Beth Whitehead sort of became a celebrity
Right. What
out of that?
current? When you're doing Entertainment Tonight, they want to hear about celebrities. At A Current Affair, yeah, we followed celebrities. We did a lot of stuff with celebrities, but at the same time, we took these stories that network news departments, local news departments are kind of putting in the trash can, not pursuing, and we began to make regular people celebrities because of the stories they were involved in, of the events that happened to them. For instance, I mean, shortly after A Current Affair started, we were all worried. We were all worried about how we were going to be seen by the press and by the critics. And of course, we thought because Murdoch owned the company and it was Murdoch's show, that all of the regular established press would frown upon it because nobody liked Rupert Murdoch barging in to the media from Australia and everything that he had done in England before, because he had tabloids and he had owned at one time Star magazine. I mean, he was a known tabloid owner. All of a sudden, the New York Times, about a month or so after we start, comes out with its review by a fellow named John Corey. Never heard of him. It's supposed to be an intellectual kind of a guy. All of a sudden, he calls A Current Affair grand entertainment. And Mr. Povich shouldn't be so embarrassed introducing these stories. It's okay. And all of a sudden, we got legitimacy. And then all of a sudden, Rupert sees the review, and within a week, we're syndicated nationwide, putting us on all the Fox stations because the New York Times gave us a big review. So by the end of 1986, we're on syndicated television, and now they're selling it to stations all across the country as like a 7 o'clock, 7:30 access show in those same time periods that Entertainment Tonight was. Now you have to understand, this is before Extra and before Access Hollywood, before Hard Copy, before Inside Edition. We're the only kind of tabloidy news show in town. So now we need stories. And fortunately, I mean, this is why I say my life is such that there's all of a sudden there are things that drop from the sky. And in the spring of 1987 comes this great story, which is the Preppy murder in Central Park with Robert Chambers, where during rough sex, this girl dies. And he is charged with the crime of murder, of homicide. And now we play this story up huge, huge. And it gets legs that do not die. I mean, this story just runs and runs. And a few months later, he's got a trial. And in the middle of a trial, all of a sudden coming into our hands is a videotape of him during his trial at a slumber party, mocking death by tearing off the head of a doll. And it just, I mean, a panorama just goes through the roof. I mean, through the roof. And the next thing you know, we're beating the biggest show in all of access television, Entertainment Tonight, and we're the number one. We're the number one show on television after Oprah. We're the number one show. We're now Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, forget about it. Now Current Affair is getting 10 ratings at 7 o'clock in the evening, and it's just, I mean, by 1988 and 89, we are really clicking. And then Rupert and I mean, Rupert and I had always, Rupert always looked at me kind of funny, and I kind of looked at Rupert funny, and he was always saying, and maybe to this day, and maybe rightfully so, I made your career. I made your career. And I said, well, it depends on who thinks who made who. I mean, you didn't know what kind of an anchorman you were going to get at Current Affair. I turned into the one that worked. So maybe I made a current affair. Who knows who made a current affair? Did a current affair make me, or I make it's the chicken and the egg? And I'm not going to make a distinction here. If you want to, you go right ahead, because we had to negotiate contracts going forward. So finally, we had a good relationship for 5 years, and a current affair. We would do hokey things, but at the same time, it was all tongue-in-cheek. One of the great stories was Mikhail Gorbachev was coming to the United States. And he was going to go to Washington. He was coming to New York, and all of a sudden it's announced that Gorbachev is going to meet with Donald Trump. Of all people, Gorbachev is going to spend time with Donald Trump, and we just think that is just hilarious. And then at the last minute, Gorbachev cancels the visit. So you can imagine how Trump felt. Well, we decide to take advantage of this. We hire a Mikhail Gorbachev lookalike, and our ace funster reporter, Gordon Elliott. Somehow, Gordon Elliott calls up Donald Trump to tell them that Gorbachev has made, he's got a few minutes and he will have a brief meeting with you in front of Trump Tower at a certain time. And so we put Gordon and the Gorbachev lookalike in a limousine, pass down Fifth Avenue in front of Trump Tower, call upstairs. Donald comes running down. Our cameras are rolling and everything. Donald jumps into the limo. Gorbachev gives him a tie. Donald is looking at him, and he's looking and he's talking and everything else. And all of a sudden, he realizes this is not right. And finally, there was a gotcha. But these stories were part of the fabric of a current affair. And that's why the audience loved it, because we could be serious at the same time with a preppy killer, be sensational by bringing out this tape, and have fun with Donald Trump at the same time. So that there was all things to all people.
So coming from a news background,
Yeah.
though, like you did,
Yeah.
were you ever uncomfortable, or did you feel
Well, I was uncomfortable. Some of the stuff was kind of loony. It was, but at the same time, this is what, I went to Brennan, the producer, the guy who really was the visionary of it. And I said, Peter, I hate some of this stuff. This stuff, he said, well, say so. So some of these stories would be aired. I said, I don't understand why we spent money doing this story. There's no story there. So he allowed me to get my frustration out. And that was all part of the reality of the show. And that's why the audience loved it, because it was so truthfully raw. And it really stuck that we weren't going to try to put one over on the viewer. We weren't. And the viewer had invested him and herself in me. And I was going to be the advocate for the viewer. So that if I thought a story stunk, the viewer thought it stunk. And I was going to tell everyone, including my own shop, that it stunk. And so it was great that way. Whoever had that kind of a leash to do that on television? In my entire career, I had never been, if you don't like it, say so. What? Do you know how many anchormen in this country have gotten really upset over the years at a certain news story that management has wanted to have a news director or the president of news has wanted to do at the network level? Whoever allowed an anchorman to say, you don't like it, tell everybody. You could do that on a current affair. It was great. So I guess that was the saving for me. You got a problem, you think?
So, Maury, what were some of the major stories on a current affair that you remember?
They were just wild, crazy stories that came into our lap. For instance, we were there first for the Jim and Tammy Faye Baker religious scandal, remember, with Jim Baker having this affair with Jessica Hahn, his church secretary, and she was from Long Island, and we were going to run with this every single day, and all of a sudden, Nightline, now Ted Koppel, has got the story, and Ted Koppel is doing the story every night on Nightline. Now we're thinking, oh, we're really legitimate now. Nightline's doing this. So all of a sudden, watching television, and I see that Ted Koppel announces that Jessica Hahn is going to be on Nightline that night. What? He got the first interview with Jessica Hahn when our indefatigable Steve Dunleavy, the reporter at the New York Post, who is our kind of tabloid reporter for anything and who would do anything, had been promised that Jessica Hahn would do us before she would do anything else. So I tell Dunleavy across the street at the bar one night, and Dunleavy goes crazy. And Dunleavy, who is this, I will get the story no matter what. Sometimes in television and newspapering, defense is the best offense, because later that night, as Nightline comes on, Ted Koppel announces that Jessica Hahn unfortunately cannot be on. She was rushed to the hospital with an undisclosed ailment. And little do we know, of course, that Dunleavy had rushed out to Long Island and convinced Jessica Hahn to go to the hospital that night and will not appear on Nightline before she appears on A Current Affair. That's how sometimes you have to keep the story to yourself. I mean, that's just one instant. The other great story about A Current Affair was in 1989, we hear the Berlin Wall is going to come down. Are you kidding? I mean, there's not going to be a Cold War. You're trying to tell me that that wall that has been up for decades is coming down? So all of us convinced Murdoch to give us his Gulfstream jet, and we all at midnight hop on the jet and fly to Berlin. Gordon Elliott, me, all the reporters, everybody, all the producers, and we go to cover the fall of the Berlin Wall the Current Affair way. And the Current Affair way was we were going to reunite a brother from an East German person. We were going to reunite him with his brother, who was a West German, and reunite him with his East German brother who he had never seen. However, he didn't want to be reunited, and we had to convince this guy to be reunited with his brother because he said he and his brother didn't get along. He said, well, we're going to get along now. So we kidnapped him, put him on the plane, and took him with us to the Berlin Wall. And we had this wild ride from West Berlin into East Germany to reunite these two brothers. And this stilted picture of this reunion as the door opened and our Current Affair cameras are there, one brother is kind of like a deer in the headlights looking at the other brother and saying, hello, my brother, I haven't seen you in a long time. And that was why Current Affair went to the Berlin Wall. The other great story about the Berlin Wall was Gordon Elliott. We couldn't find a way. Everybody, of course, was trying to knock down the wall. So Gordon Elliott goes to the West Berlin Fire Department and buys, at an enormous price, one of these huge fireman pickaxes. He brings it to the wall. He stands on top of the wall with the pickaxe. And I say to him, Gordon, I said, come on, you're the American. At least let the German bang down, disassemble the wall with the pitchfork, with the pickaxe, please. Give the fireman's pickaxe to a German, for crying out loud. So he gives it to the German. The German starts going like this, and the next week, the cover of Time and Newsweek is this German with Gordon's pickaxe. That was the best.
Were there any stories that were off limits in your book at A Current Affair?
Well, I think there were stories we wouldn't do. There were stories that, I'm trying to, we didn't do religious stories unless it was a cult story. Cults we liked. We love cults. Exposing cults were great. But, we didn't like to do a lot of religion stories. We didn't do a lot of political stories. It wasn't our fare. We didn't cover politics that much. We were accused of trashing people, but we didn't do politics much. We did most of our stories were about everyday people.
So did you miss doing those news stories in the
Yeah, I missed it, but at the same time, you miss it, but at the same time, you're getting known. You're becoming known, and you're sailing along pretty good. All of a sudden, this local anchorman is getting a lot of notoriety, and And we're getting married. And next thing you know, Connie and I are on the cover of People magazine, and so it's pretty heady times, and this is the high life.
How did the title for the show come about?
Well, it came about because I had no idea about the name of the show, but apparently Brennan told me, the Aussie producer, that there was a show in Australia called A Current Affair. And so Rupert had borrowed that name. However, I did not know that show in Australia was kind of like a 60 Minutes. It wasn't as racy as our version of it, but that's where the show came. But the most important part of the title and the graphics was the sound. And the sound of the show, there was this triangle called A Current Affair, and it's Current Affair. But the sound was, all of a sudden there'd be the sound go ka-chung, and this triangle would come out, and A Current Affair would come out, and it was the sound. Because the first thing we thought of, this was really a guy named J.B. Blunk, who was our graphics man. He farmed this out to some graphics people. But I can remember sitting around before the show ever started, and they were saying, well, here's the deal. 60 Minutes has its clock, and that tick, 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 tick. Everybody, if you're in another part of the house, you hear the tick, 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 60 Minutes is on. So now we have to get a sound. So this sound, this ka-chung, and when A Current Affair got big, all of a sudden, all these radio disc jockeys were using the sound and the ka-chung, and we were sending it out on the airwaves to be played by everybody, and everybody wanted to know what it was, and it was the sound of a construction paper cutter, the old-time elementary school construction paper cutters, and the swish of a golf club swishing through the air, put through a synthesizer, and that was the sound. And so, therefore, we had our ticking clock, and our ticking clock was the ka-chung, and it started and ended every segment of A Current Affair.
How do you think A Current Affair changed television and broadcast journalism?
Well, I'm a firm believer that A Current Affair had a huge impact on television news, and I'm not saying just local news. I mean network news. Network news started covering stories. For instance, the Jim and Tammy Faye Baker story. 3 years before, nobody would have covered that story on network news. That story ran for like 15 straight days on Nightline and the evening news. O.J. Simpson would have never been the story that it was if it wasn't for A Current Affair. It opened up network news to so many, and I'm not saying they were happy about it, but it opened the news up for so many more stories than they would have put on. And I'll tell you, some of the network news people were fascinated with A Current Affair. Don Hewitt, the executive producer of 60 Minutes, his daughter worked for us at A Current Affair. He was fascinated. He would come to our parties. He would ask me all the time about the stories, where we got them, how we checked them out. What did we do? How do we turn these stories around so fast? Because this is 5 days a week. We'd do 3 segments a day. It was like 10-minute stories, like 60 Minutes was doing, and we were doing them in a raw fashion and things like that. But he was fascinated how we did them because he saw the ratings take off, and I think maybe the 60 Minutes format changed a little bit because of that.
How do you think that the show affected just American culture in general?
Well, it's interesting. I think, on the downside, there was less privacy. There was less privacy. Because A Current Affair spawned Inside Edition. It spawned Hard Copy. It spawned Access Hollywood, Extra, TMZ. All these shows were spawned by A Current Affair. It kind of really changed the landscape. There was nothing like it before. In fact, when I left the show after 5 years. The show went on for another maybe 5 years. Then the show was dead. They tried to recreate the show with a couple of years ago. It didn't work. Now, I don't know why it didn't work, but it didn't work. I was long gone. But maybe it was just the times. Maybe it was way before internet, so therefore it was way before the advent of all of the variety of cable shows that are there. There was, I mean, it was, sure, CNN was on, but there wasn't the huge 24-hour news cycle that there is now. I don't know if it had never run and started now, I don't know if it would have worked. But it was so different then that people were just attracted to it.
So then let's talk about you leaving A Current Affair and getting offered your own.
Yeah,
talk
show. It was a contentious time that when I left. I had worked A Current Affair for 5 years. I wanted to go back. Maybe I had had a fill of it, whatever. I saw that it wasn't doing anything more for me, so I wanted to go back to talk. I wanted to do. Phil Donahue was still working. Oprah was working. People like Geraldo were working. Sally Jesse Raphael. I wanted my own talk show, and Fox was kind of reluctant at the time to give me a talk show, but then negotiations started, and we kind of said, okay, stay on A Current Affair, and we'll give you a talk show. And I don't know whether they're just trying to make me happy or not, but unbeknownst to them, Paramount, which owned, I only know this in hindsight, Paramount owned Entertainment Tonight. And as I said, we were just, Entertainment Tonight was scared to death because we were taking their mantle. And the head of syndication at Paramount, Lucy Salhaney, came to me and offered me my own talk show for Paramount. And so I was negotiating both with Fox and Paramount, and finally Paramount made the best offer. I didn't realize later, I don't know if Lucy Salhaney thought I was a good talk show host or not, but she figured this: if you get that guy off A Current Affair, then Entertainment Tonight has a better chance of beating it. And so, and she was right. So I left Fox, not under the greatest of circumstances. I regret that, but I left, and Barry Diller, who was running Fox at the time, was very upset with me. He gave me a tongue lashing my father had never even given me. Barry can get very upset. And I think, rightfully so, because he thought he had a deal with me. And we just hadn't formalized things, and there were a couple of small, outstanding issues, and I decided to go to Paramount. So he got very mad at me, but we made up later because when I ended up doing a talk show for Universal, he owned Universal. So we kind of made up when I said when I saw him, and I didn't know whether he was still mad at me, and I said, Barry, I'm getting so old, I can't remember. Did we make up? And he laughed, so everything was over, fortunately. But I went to Paramount and started this talk show. And it was an interesting change because now I had to compete in the daytime, not nighttime. This is daytime. Now I got, there are women out there. Now, I don't know how women liked A Current Affair. A lot of people thought A Current Affair was a male kind of show and everything. And the research had showed that there was a negative component to my personality, according to the survey. And I can understand that because everybody's not going to like those stories we did on A Current Affair. And some people just hated them. They were intrusive. They invaded people's privacy and everything like that. So I had to, again, it's like campaigning all over again. So Paramount did a very, very smart thing. Very interesting, and I was very much for it. They hired, as my research consultant and kind of image maker, a guy who had gone into the television consulting business. His name was Roger Ailes. And Roger Ailes, who had been in politics, working for Ronald Reagan, working for Richard Nixon, working for a lot of Republicans. Roger and I knew each other very slightly. But so we met, we were just casual acquaintances. But when we met, we understood each other. I mean, I'm trying to knock on a door and be welcomed in again and have people be comfortable with me in a setting that hadn't been used to in a long time, and that's a daytime woman's audience, because that's who's watching television. So Roger and I set about running a campaign, a launch campaign, that basically meant that I was in a political campaign. I was trying to be elected to office, and I wanted to display all these parts of my personality. So I did these spots, and I talked about showing my warts. I'm a divorced man. I'm remarried. I'm this, and it got very personal. And it seemed to work. And we started the show in 1991, and it was not a runaway hit, but I can remember at that time the head of Paramount was Brandon Tartikoff, who was the former great primetime genius at NBC. And Brandon told me he was sad that he's gone now, but Brandon was so instinctual. He understood it. He says, Maury, here's the deal. You don't want to come out too hot, and you don't want to come out too cold. You want to come out and be accepted enough so that you can be accepted and then grow. Okay, fine. And I think that's what happened. I think we came out medium. We started to grow a little bit. And next thing you know, the show, it was kind of a Donahue type show, but I was a different face, and Phil had gone almost 25 years, so he was kind of on the end of his run, and Geraldo had gotten a little. I think Geraldo was about to leave. Sally Jesse was different than we were, so we were finding our own niche, dealing in some social issues, and the show worked. Excuse me. So the show worked, and it was going well. 1 year became 3, became 4, became 5. Now I'm 7 years into the talk show, and all of a sudden I find that Connie is at Liberty. She's between jobs somewhere, and my contract is about to be up. And all of a sudden we get this call from Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had started DreamWorks. He and Steven Spielberg and David Geffen had started the DreamWorks, and they wanted to get into the television business, and they wanted to do an access show from 7 or 7:30, a kind of a news-oriented show to be sold in a syndicated market, to go against Entertainment Tonight, because the Current Affair by that time had run out of gas. So there was Entertainment Tonight and Inside Edition and Hard Copy maybe and a couple of others. And maybe Access Hollywood had started by now. And so this was the opportunity for Connie and I to work together. And even though in the Access time periods there was Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, we felt, and Entertainment Tonight, we thought there were enough time periods. So I decided to leave the talk show market and leave Paramount at the end of my 7-year career. And this was very exciting. I was going to work with my wife. I never, hadn't worked with my wife since I was fired as an anchorman 10 years before or whatever. So now, more than 10 years before. And so this would be fun. It would be new. It would be exciting. Except the problem was that DreamWorks couldn't sell the show because Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune had their markets, Entertainment Tonight had their markets, and they couldn't ply any of the Access Hollywood time periods away from it. We couldn't sell it to anybody. There's nobody going to buy it. So the idea fizzled. And now I'm back, and my deal with Paramount was going to be up, and now I am at Liberty. I'm a free agent. I can go back to the talk show market, and it's like I'm a free agent in sports. I can put myself out there. All these companies can bid, and I can go wherever I want. And that's what I did. I basically, and Paramount wanted to re-up, and they made a bid, and Warner Brothers made a bid, and King World made a bid, and Universal all of a sudden made a bid. Universal TV was being run by a fellow named Greg Midell, who had been part of my Paramount story when I was there. He was the head of sales when I was there. And they gave the best offer. And so I went to Universal. Paramount was very upset. I said, I'm sorry, all you had to do is meet the price. You didn't meet the price. I was going to play businessman. And so I went to Universal. And so I started another show, not the Maury Povich show. The show was called Maury because Paramount owned the Maury Povich show, that title. So that's how the Maury show was created. And that was, 12, 13 years ago.
So now let's talk about the content of the daytime talk shows and some of the stories that you sort of become famous for.
First go around during the Paramount days, we did not do those stories, those edgy stories that we do now. It was more of a Donahue type. It was trying to put a legitimate. I want to say that they're not legitimate now, but trying to put a tamer tag on these stories. I mean, it was. We wouldn't allow a lot on the air in terms of physical. There was no, in people's faces, things like that, the way they are now. We never allowed fighting, of course, but it was more of a calm. There wasn't a lot of yelling and screaming the way it's become on my show now. But the themes, I mean, we didn't do paternity on the Maury Povich show. We did out of control teenagers, but never the way we do them now, where these kids come out and they're in kind of these racy outfits that they wear at home, telling the audience how to get off and all that kind of stuff. So there was no cheating shows the way we do them now with lie detector tests. It was a much tamer time and a tamer type of show.
No, were the changes, did they come because you were asked to make changes when you went to Universal, or were those personal changes?
We were just trying to find ways to be different and to give the viewer something that would pique their interest. But at the same time, and I always maintain this, I believe that the themes that we use now these are social themes. Women searching for the fathers of their kids. It is an underlying theme in this country. You have these broken families, you have these fathers who aren't stepping up, or you have these women who are so promiscuous they don't know who the fathers of their children are. This is an ongoing, underlying social issue in this country. Out of control kids, 13-year-olds who want babies, that is an ongoing issue in this country. Teenage pregnancy for the first time in 15 years has gone up. So, I stake my claim to all of these issues, and we do them in a really edgy way. I agree.
How media savvy are your guests, and has that changed over the years from the Maury Povich show to now?
That's an interesting question about media savvy. I don't think our guests are any more media savvy. I think our audience is. I think the audience is really media savvy. I mean, they're very knowledgeable. They know exactly what they want. And they know, particularly my audience. My audience knows exactly what they want. They want, as they say, we want drama, and that's what they want. And you have to give them drama in order to appeal to them. And the guests themselves, I don't think they're that savvy in terms of being media savvy, because people have to understand, they don't make any money by coming to the show. I mean, all we do is give them a plane ticket. And by the way, some of them have never been on a plane. We put them in a hotel room and we give them $50 a day. I mean, that's all you get. So it's not like you're going to be a celebrity. But it is, to me, the rawest form of what is called reality television. It, to me, is the quintessential reality television, is to be on my show.
What do you say to people who have criticized the show and
It's I've been criticized from the day I said on Panorama one time that I thought that Jesus was the first hippie. And ever since I said that in like 1967, I've been getting stuff said to me and about me and things like that. It comes with the territory. I'll tell you a funny story. The Washington Post has a great television writer named Tom Shales. He's won the Pulitzer Prize, and one time when I was doing a current affair, Tom wrote a long column about me, and he used every S word in the world: sordid, smarmy, all these terrible words. And I called up my father and I said, Dad, don't show Tom Shales' column to Mom this morning, and I knew he had read it. I said, because she doesn't have to hear this stuff. And he says, oh, don't worry about it, son. Just go about your business. Don't worry about any of this stuff. And I said, yeah, Dad, but he used. It really. He eviscerated me. It was just terrible. He says, don't worry about it, son. Just go about your business. I said, yeah, but son. He says, well, I hired Tom Shales here at the Washington Post when I was the sports editor. He first started to do sports. I said, yeah, but Dad, I'm your son. He said, yes, son, but good writers are hard to find. So I've been getting this in and outside my family all my life. And, I've been able to handle it. It's okay. Look, I'm on television. What am I looking for? I'm not going to get everybody to like me.
How do you keep your own opinions out of some of these shows? And when you have a wild teen or something.
Well, some of the times, fortunately, on a show like this, you can use your own opinions. And I do castigate and chastise these youngsters. And I bring up my own circumstances. And when it comes to, let's say, a father who finds out that he's not the father of the child he thinks he is, and he's devastated, and I say, look, this child needs a father. You've been there the first couple of years of his life. We have a child in our home, and he's not mine by birth, but we love him as much as we love our own children. So, you can be a great dad even though you're not the birth father. So I bring my own experiences into the show, and I think that that's a saving grace for me, and I think that's good. It's good for me because I think it offers something. And I think viewers and guests want to see a piece of you, want to see a personal piece of you in a talk show format. Look, Oprah uses it better than anybody. She's talking about her weight all of her life, talking about her childhood, talking about what she went through. You have to use your warts as a tool for good. You have to.
Who do you consider the audience for Maury now? You were talking about women in daytime.
It's a very interesting. This is it's a confounding situation. The Nielsen research people, the people who measure television, would say that this is really an anomaly because the older I get, the younger my audience is. The other day it came out that for last week or something, and in November of 2009, I was the top-rated talk show among women and adults 18 to 34. 18 to 34. I'm 70 years old. There is no business for a 70-year-old to have that kind of an appeal. Just none. I am 2 generations away from these people.
So what do you think it is that attracts
I
them
think
to the
it's
show?
I think it's a feeling of I'm an uncle. I'm a kind of a straight shooter. I'm an advocate for the audience. In my own way, I kind of cut across racial lines. And I think the audience knows that there is nothing in my background that gives me any relationship with these guests. Nothing. I didn't live the way they do. I don't think the way they do. I don't act the way they do. But at the same time, there's an instinctual feeling there that I've got the best interest of the guests and the audience at heart. I don't know what it is, and quite frankly, I'm very reluctant to think about why I have it, because if I analyze it, I would overanalyze it and come to a conclusion that might not be correct. It's like the first time I ever did a paternity show, and my producer was briefing me about the story, and she said, "Okay, Maury, so the result." I said, I don't think I want to know the result. I don't want to know the result. I'll open up that envelope and read the result and be as shocked and surprised as A, my guest, B, my audience, and everybody else. Because if I know the answer, I might skew questions in a certain way that the interview shouldn't be done that way. So I want to know. I don't want to know anything more than the audience or the guests knows until I open up the envelope, and it's worked. It's worked. So I don't want to overanalyze why I think I have some kind of simpatico with my audience and my guests.
So in terms of production on the show, what is your input with producers and finding stories and finding real people?
I don't do them. I don't do it. We've had a spectacular record and a record that is unmatched. I mean, every single guest we've had on is a guest. I mean, there's a real person. These things happen to them. They are in this quandary. They have this drama in their life. There is this conflict going on, whatever. Hold it. 5 years later.
3, 2, speak.
So, Maury, how many shows do you tape in a week or in a day? Do you do more than
Usually-
one in a day? Or?
Usually we tape 2 a day,
Okay.
and we'll work 2 or 3 days a week. I mean, it's a great job. I mean, I work like, 26 weeks a year. I have all summer off. I tape 150 shows or so a year. It's really, it's the best job I could ever have.
Do you tape the show? Do you do live to tape, or do you stop at all at
My
times?
tape schedule is pretty tight. In other words, if I need 46 minutes of show, I think that's about the time. I asked recently how long it was, 46 minutes. I probably tape an hour and 5, something like that. So there may be 20 minutes of overage. It depends. I get wrapped up sometimes in the subject, and some segments go too long, and they have to cut them. But and of course, if anybody, and it happens, if anybody gets too close to each other, and I'm not saying that there are blows, but people grab people. We don't show that, so we have to edit that out. But yeah, I'd say if I need 46 minutes of show, I'll add an extra 20.
So on a typical day of taping, can you kind of give us just a brief run through
Sure.
of how that works for you? And do you get briefed by producers?
Right. The night before, I get the briefing material for both shows. There might be a paternity show, might be an out-of-control kids show that I go home. And, it's like being in school for an assignment. I'm sitting there at home, and I read about an hour's worth of material or so. And then the next morning, I come in, and the producer meets with me around 9 or 9:30 before I go to makeup or after I go to makeup, whatever. And she goes over segment by segment the show and the individual stories. After I go over those segments with the producer, they'll leave. I'll just kind of mull them in my mind. And then we usually start the shows around 10:30 in the morning. First show will stop somewhere between 11:30 and 12. We'll break for lunch. We'll come back at 1 or 1:30. We'll do the second show. We'll stop around 3 or so. I'll do some promotion material, and then I'm gone. And the next morning, the same way. We now tape in Stamford, Connecticut. I live in the middle of New York, so it's like a 45-minute drive, and I drive that myself. And I work Thursdays and Fridays, or Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Since we're owned by the same company, NBC Universal owns Jerry Springer and myself and Steve Wilkos, so we have one theater for 3 shows. Each of us have a separate set. It's a very modern, very electronic set where they come in and out of the fly wings and all these things, and NBC has found that it's cost beneficial to have 3 shows out of 1 studio.
So after 18 years, do you
Yeah.
still enjoy doing the show?
I do. I enjoy them because, you know, it's strange. I mean, I can go back to the beginning. It's still storytelling, and it's, you know, you're not telling the story about what the president did today, but in great measure, it's just as fascinating to me to tell the story about a young woman who has a 2-year-old child who wants this guy to step up and be the father, and he's been denying that child for the last 2 years. That story to me is as compelling as a lot of these stories that you know, the TV news people are doing every day.
And now the show's been renewed through 2012, correct?
Apparently, yes.
Okay. And now, if it were to end in 2012, how would you want it to end? How would you want to go out?
Just the way it's been going. I mean, I don't want anything more than I've got. I've had a very, very long career. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, in terms of national syndication, which anybody will tell you is the most ruthless form of television there is in terms of, particularly in talk shows. I mean, the graveyard is huge. I mean, somebody told me that there have been 80-some talk shows since I've started doing the Maury Povich show in 1991. And if you added A Current Affair and the Maury Povich show and the Maury show, there's nobody in this business that has had back-to-back-to-back successes in syndication. And so, you know, I'll hang my hat on that.
And what in your career is your proudest achievement, would you say?
That's interesting. Believe it or not, I think that the best event I ever covered was the Berlin Wall, because and we did do some serious stories there, just not the ones that I enumerated on. But all my life, I mean, I'm a reader of history, and from the age of 3 until the age of 1989, 50, the age of 3 until the age of 50, I was consumed by this Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, and everybody who lived here, and everybody who went in the early 50s through this duck and cover, fear the hydrogen, nuclear bombs, and everything else, because this was the great enemy. And to see this Cold War melt and that wall come down, and to just be there live when it happened, that was the grandest moment of my career.
Can you give us just a brief, some advice, brief advice for aspiring talk show hosts?
Well, first of all, I think what is really important is a good background. And when I say a background, I mean a background in some kind of liberal arts. And I'm not talking about formal education, because, as I've said, I was a terrible student in college. But the one thing I had consistently throughout my life was this voracious appetite to read. And I read about history, and I read about literature, and I did it on my own a lot. It had nothing to do with the encouragement of my teachers through the years. But I really had a good background of the world, particularly the world that you were living in at the time. Even as I was growing up as a youngster through at the end of World War II, at like 5 and 6, I remember reading about it, and through the Cold War, as I said, on through politics and everything else. I mean, I always had this fascination about, and I read 5 newspapers a day, and I still read the Wall Street Journal, and I do a kind of crazy, edgy talk show, okay? Doesn't sound like the same person, but it is. And so I think with that background, and the system as I understand it now, where internships have become the stepping stone for whether you're a news journalist or an entertainment person or an information person, talk show host, whatever it is, these internships to me are key. And then use that internships to ingratiate yourself into the places where you've interned, so that once you get out of college and you're seeking a position, get in any way you can. It doesn't matter, if you're an assistant publicity writer or whatever, the way I started. Just get in and then show people how interested you are. The best producers, these young producers that are terrific on my show, they just will do anything to get their guest. I mean, you have to be very, I don't want to say aggressive, but that's the word. You have to be aggressive in your pursuit of what you want. And you have to like it. Gosh, you have to like it. You just can't do it because, and don't think that, you can't say, it's like, I've had people, you all right?
I'm sorry.
Want some water?
I think I'm okay. I'm sorry.
I've had people say to me, "What do you want to be in television?" I want to be an anchor person. Well, don't you want to be a reporter? Don't you want to be a writer? Nope, I just want to be an anchor person. Well, that's not the way it is, because no good anchor person in their life was an anchor person of any note without being a writer and a reporter and a gatherer and know about tape and know about producing and know about how to put the story together and everything else. So it's a step. It's all steps. Anchor people don't just exist. Talk show hosts don't exist. You can't. I'm telling you, there are so many failed talk shows by people who are not in broadcast. They've tried to take comedians, make them talk show hosts. Doesn't work a lot of times. Singers, talk show hosts, doesn't work. Athletes, doesn't work. Doesn't work. There's got to be a trail, I think, of broadcast to be successful. And when I say broadcast, in every aspect, producing, writing, gathering, everything.
And how would you like to be remembered?
I'm just a guy who always didn't want to do anything in my life after I couldn't hit a curveball than to be successful in television. And I've lived my dream.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.